All right, life under slavery. I wanted to quickly give you some notes to kind of help you catch up with the success criteria. Remember, we were studying living conditions and rebellious acts. Okay, and if you can describe just a few causes and effects of slave living conditions in the early part of the colonies, or I should say, in the beginning, when the colonies were just establishing themselves, and some of the rebellious acts. That's all we need to fill in our chart here. So let me just bring up my pointer. Let's begin. Here are some of the notes, okay? And they're supposed to go straight across. All of this came directly from the reading. Okay, remember in the escape room, we talked about overseers, and overseers were managers of the plantation. Okay, but as a result of their management, they were very harsh. They would whip the slaves to make them work harder. There were also drivers, slave drivers, and these slave drivers were slaves themselves. Okay, but they made sure that that their fellow slaves, were working at a certain pace. Many times they drove them really hard as if they were the overseer. Okay, so that was a direct result of slave drivers. Household work. Now, some slaves cooked and cleaned the house. Okay, the large plantation, the large estate on the plantation, the large house. This was less demanding, or I shouldn't say that, I'm sorry. This was less harsh, it wasn't less demanding. When compared to field work, as we'll get to into a moment, it was less harsh and less demanding. Women in the fields. Now, it was the same as any other slave. However, some of the results that we read in the escape room and also in the textbook were they were often sexually abused. Food and housing was very basic for slaves. They often got the scraps. They lived in one room cabins. And over here, as a result of not having enough or just having basic food, they often raised their own animals, chickens and hogs, I think the book says, and they grew their own gardens. Okay, so they had more food for their families. Now, West African groups of slaves. Now, slaves came from all different parts of West Africa. Once they found themselves on the plantations together, they would often create their own language by combining African words with English words. Okay, and I think the book gives you a few examples of those. You can go back and add some of those. Also, music and art. We know about the artisans, and the artisans would make many of the things that they needed by hand. They were very skilled at that. They learned this, in their home country. And finally, there was a slave that the book talks about that knew how to create vaccines. Okay, and as a result, he showed his slave master, and he saved an entire city from a smallpox outbreak. All right, so those are a few of the causes and effects for living conditions. Now, when you get down here to acts of rebellion, we know that the slaves were treated harshly. So, because they were treated harshly, they often fake sickness so they wouldn't have to work, run away. Ooh, a typo. I didn't see that. Or they would break tools. Okay. There are some other things that the book says. I encourage you to go in there and list those here as well. Okay. And then finally, rebellion. Okay. The slaves would fight back. And there was one rebellion called the Stono Rebellion that was led by a slave by the nickname of Cato. All right. And he was a literate slave, which meant that he knew how to read. Okay. He was a leader. And it was a very serious and violent rebellion. And as a result, okay, effects are results, American colonists grew fearful of slave rebellions. All right. So add those things to your notes. This entire slide, okay, is extra credit. And you can turn this into the Boost My Grade folder in our course. Now, when you go to fill in your thinking map. Remember, these icons, they don't have to be the exact ones, but these icons certainly give your thinking map sketch note quality and a little extra credit as well. Over here, I want you to list two living conditions, just two. Okay, I gave you a number of living conditions to write, but list two, describe it, and then give the result. Give the effect that it had on living conditions for the slaves. Okay, so you're going to list two. And then finally, you choose one of those um, acts of resistance to describe here, and then show me the result. Okay, and that's all I need from you. All right, you can either do how they just physically resisted, all right, and then kind of explain it, just take it directly from your notes, or you can describe here the Stono Rebellion and give us the results. Hope that helps.